My son cheated on his wife. With my best friend, you never think betrayal will wear the face of someone you once loved like family. You never think it will come from your own blood, your child, or the person who once held your hand through grief and called you sister when your own had passed. But here I am, 71 years old, sitting on my porch swing in northern Vermont, watching the world spin with the weight of a secret that shattered everything I once believed about love, loyalty, and motherhood. My name is Margaret Hollis, but everyone in this town knows me as Maggie. Church volunteer. Pie contest champion. The kind of woman who keeps her porch clean and her opinions quiet. Except this time, I can't be quiet. Not anymore. It began with a mug. Isn't that strange? Not a scream, not a fight, just a simple ceramic mug. I had stopped by my son's house on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing over homemade lasagna for him and his wife, Nora. Nora, my daughter-in-law of 10 years, was everything a mother could ask for in a woman her son marries. She was kind, gentle, a schoolteacher with a soft voice and strong eyes. She cared for David, my son, even when he didn't deserve it. And believe me, there were times he didn't. I used the spare key, they knew I often did, and walked into the quiet living room. The television was on, volume low, playing one of those home renovation shows Nora liked. But she wasn't home. Neither was David. I placed the casserole on the counter and noticed 2 coffee mugs in the sink. One had a pale pink lipstick stain, not Nora's shade. I knew, because I had bought her that exact shade of coral for her birthday last month. This one was blush pink. And it hit me like ice. Still, I told myself not to spiral. Maybe it was a colleague. Maybe Nora changed her lipstick. Maybe. But then I walked into the guest room. And found a silk scarf. Leopard print. Perfumed with something too bold to be Nora. I should have left it alone. I should have walked out, shut my mouth, and kept being the good mother. But something inside me, call it gut, or rage, or that womanly instinct we ignore too often, told me I had to know the truth. So I looked. I checked his calendar. His drawer. His phone, when it lit up on the table with a message preview, last night was magic. I still smell you. Celeste. My best friend. I dropped the phone like it burned me. Because it did. My chest constricted so tight I thought I might collapse. Celeste, who sat beside me at Nora's baby shower. Celeste, who held my hand after my husband's funeral and said, "We women must protect each other." Celeste, who had sleepovers in my guest room when her second marriage fell apart. That Celeste. With my son. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't call David. I didn't scream at Celeste. I just watched Nora's Instagram story from hours earlier, a picture of her and David at a charity event, her in a navy dress, smiling like her world wasn't a lie. The next morning, I made a choice. Not to stay silent. Not to protect my son. But to protect the woman he was betraying, the woman who deserved the truth. Even if it meant breaking my own heart. Even if it meant losing them both. Because what they didn't know was that I had already begun collecting proof. At the end of this story, you'll know why I did what I did, and how one mother's silence turned into justice. If this story made your heart race, or if you've ever been torn between love and loyalty, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me below, where are you listening from? I'd love to know your city or country. That night, after the message from Celeste lit up David's phone like a flashing red warning, I sat in the dark of my kitchen with my hands around a cooling cup of chamomile tea. My reflection in the glass window stared back at me, tired and hollow. How had I raised a man who could lie so effortlessly to a woman like Nora? And how had I shared so much of my life with a woman who could betray me in the worst way possible, by touching what should have been untouchable? I didn't confront them. Not yet. I needed more than a lipstick stain and a suggestive text. I needed something undeniable, something that would make David's smugness crack and Celeste's perfect smile fade for good. I needed truth loud enough to silence their denials. So I did what no mother ever wants to do. I started spying on my own child. 2 days later, I invited Nora over for tea. She came like always, with that graceful walk of hers and a Tupperware of scones she insisted on baking for me. She was wearing that seafoam sweater I'd knitted her last Christmas. I wanted to scream then. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and say, "Sweetheart, he doesn't deserve you." But instead, I poured her tea and listened. She was glowing, talking about how David had been so attentive lately. "He's planning a weekend away for our anniversary," she beamed. "Somewhere upstate, just the two of us." I forced a smile and nodded. My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. A weekend away? Was that where he was taking Celeste? The thought made my stomach churn, but I kept my voice light. "That sounds lovely, Nora. You deserve it." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Maggie. You're more of a mother to me than my own ever was." That broke me. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I had to stay calm. I had to be steady, for her. She had no idea the knife in her back had 2 sets of fingerprints on it. That night, after she left, I called in a favor. A neighbor's niece, Natalie, was a part-time private investigator, discreet and thorough. I told her everything, from the lipstick to the scarf to the text. I gave her Celeste's name, David's schedule, even the code to his apartment building's security gate. She didn't ask too many questions. Just nodded and said, "I'll handle it." A week passed. Every ring of my phone made my chest tighten. Every silence in the house felt heavy. I stopped answering Celeste's calls. She left voicemails. "Mags, you okay? Miss our lunch this week, call me." Her voice felt like a poison now. Then the photos arrived. I was alone when I opened the email. I remember that clearly, because I dropped my tea again. Second time in 2 weeks. There they were. David and Celeste. Together. In a restaurant 2 towns over. She was leaning over the table, touching his face. Another photo, David opening the door of a motel room. Celeste walking in first. I stared at those images for so long my eyes burned. And yet, I didn't cry. I printed them. Tucked them into an envelope. And waited. Because I didn't just want Nora to know. I wanted her to hear it from me. From the woman who once rocked David to sleep and wiped Celeste's tears during her divorces. I owed Nora that much. And when I did tell her, I wanted to do it in a way that left no room for confusion, only truth. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a witness. And soon, I'd become her ally. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, untouched, but pulsing like a live wire every time I passed it. It was thick with truth, photographs, printouts of messages, screenshots, motel timestamps. Proof. Cold, cruel proof. But what haunted me more than anything was the look I imagined on Nora's face when she saw it all. A woman like her didn't deserve this. And I didn't deserve to be the one to break her heart. But if I didn't tell her, who would? Certainly not David. And Celeste? She'd laugh her way out of it and call it a mistake. That Saturday, Nora stopped by again. She always did. She'd bring over her baked apple slices, warm from the oven, wrapped in parchment and kindness. I knew what I had to do. "Can we sit, sweetheart?" I said, my voice low. She looked surprised. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I led her to the dining table. The envelope was already placed in the center, resting beside a pot of chamomile tea and 2 empty cups. My hands trembled slightly as I sat across from her. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for the envelope. I placed my hand gently over hers. "Before you open it, I need you to listen to me. What you're about to see. It's going to hurt. But I want you to know something, Nora. I love you like my own daughter. And I didn't want this to be true. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed to be mistaken. But I wasn't. She looked confused, then worried. Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. She pulled out the photos. One by one. And the more she looked, the more color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Not a cry. Not a gasp. Just silence. A silence I will never forget. The last item she read was the printed message from Celeste: "Your bed always feels better than mine. Sneak away soon?" When Nora finally looked up, her eyes shimmered, but not with tears. With disbelief. With betrayal. "Celeste," she whispered. "Your best friend Celeste?" I nodded slowly, my own voice barely holding steady. "Yes." She stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign tongue. Then her voice broke. "And David, he knew I loved her. I trusted her." I nodded again. My heart ached so deeply I could barely breathe. So did I. The tears came then. Not loud sobs. Just soft, shaking weeps into her hands. She didn't wail. She didn't scream. She folded into herself like a woman watching the world collapse and knowing she had no hands free to stop it. I reached across and held her. For the first time, I wasn't just her mother-in-law. I was the only woman left who hadn't lied to her. When she finally lifted her head, her cheeks were wet but her voice was clear. "Did you know this whole time?" "I suspected," I said quietly. "But I waited for proof. Because I didn't want to bring you a storm without a shelter." She looked me dead in the eyes. "Why are you showing me this, Maggie? You're his mother." And I'll never forget what I said next. "I'm his mother. But I'm not his accomplice." That's the moment she broke. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. She threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. Later that evening, after she left with the envelope in her purse and her dignity intact, I poured myself a glass of wine. Just one. And stared out the window as the sun set over my garden. I had chosen a side. And it wasn't the one I gave birth to. It was the one I respected. And from that moment on, Nora and I were no longer just tied by marriage. We were tied by truth. And I knew she would need me for what came next. Because Nora wasn't done. She was just getting started. 3 days after Nora learned the truth, I received a knock on my door that chilled my blood. It was her. Celeste. Standing on my porch, arms full of yellow tulips, wearing that signature smile she always wore when she wanted something soft, manipulative, deceptive. I opened the door slowly, bracing myself against the storm of emotion swirling in my gut. "Megs," she chirped, stepping in like she owned the place. "I've been calling and calling. Thought maybe your phone died." It hadn't. I had just stopped answering. She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't seen her hands tangled in my son's hair in those photographs. Like she hadn't just shattered the family I spent my life holding together. She placed the flowers on the kitchen counter and poured herself a glass of water, making herself at home as she always did. "You wouldn't believe how stressful my week's been," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Some people have no concept of boundaries. Anyway, I thought we could catch up. You always make me feel better." I stood silently across from her, arms crossed, leaning on the counter, studying her. She finally noticed. "Mags," she asked, brows knitting. "You okay?" "Sit," I said, gesturing to the table. My voice was flat. No warmth. No hospitality. Just steel. She blinked, startled. "Okay," she sat, and for a moment, she looked up at me with eyes that had once comforted me through some of my worst days. I thought of how she helped me pick out David's graduation suit. How we cried together when my husband passed. I had loved her like a sister. And she had smiled in my face while crawling into my son's bed. "Do you have anything to tell me?" I asked. Her eyes flickered. "What do you mean?" "About you. And David." She hesitated. Then laughed nervously. Mags, are you serious? David is like a nephew to me, I snapped. Don't insult my intelligence. Her lips parted slightly, like she'd just been slapped. I reached into the drawer, pulled out a smaller envelope, and slid it across the table. Go ahead. Look. She opened it. Slowly. One photograph. Then another. A motel receipt. A screenshot. The same evidence I gave Nora, only this time, presented with fury. The silence between us was unbearable. She closed the envelope with trembling fingers. You didn't mean to get caught, I cut her off. You didn't mean for me to find out. You didn't mean for Nora to see the pictures. She dropped her gaze. Megs. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. You slept with my son, I said, slowly, painfully. You lied to Nora's face. You stood in this house, week after week, hugging me, knowing what you were doing behind my back. And you want to talk about love? Tears welled in her eyes. He came on to me. He said things were over with Nora. I interrupted again. Don't try to twist this. You're not the victim. You're a grown woman. You made a choice. Her lips quivered. What are you going to do? I already did it, I said. Nora knows everything. She recoiled like the words slapped her. You told her? I did. Because she deserved to hear it from someone who loves her. And that's clearly not you, or David. Maggie, please. This will destroy everything. Your son. Your friendship with me. I straightened. He's not my friend. And neither are you. She stared at me like I was a stranger. Then stood, gathering her things with trembling hands. You'll regret this, she said quietly. Blood is blood. You don't turn on your own child. I stepped closer. No. But I also don't protect a man who betrays his wife. And I don't break bread with women who crawl into their best friend's family and burn it from the inside. She turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. And I exhaled. It was the hardest thing I'd done in my life. Not burying my husband. Not raising a son alone. Not even watching Nora cry. But cutting out the woman who had once been the closest thing I had to a sister. Still. I knew one thing. The real fire hadn't even started yet. Because Nora had a plan. And this time, she wouldn't just walk away quietly. It was a Wednesday morning when Nora came to my door wearing a different kind of smile. Not the warm one she usually wore. Not the strained one she forced after the betrayal. No, this smile was something else. It was sharp. Controlled. A blade wrapped in silk. I stepped aside, and she walked in like she owned the ground under her feet. She wore a black blouse, hair tied back, not a trace of makeup, but still, she looked like someone who had finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. Is she gone? She asked quietly. Celeste? I nodded. She won't be back. Nora nodded too, more to herself than to me. Good. Then we can talk. She sat at my table, the same table where just days ago she had cried into her hands. Now she sat tall, composed, fingers laced together like a woman who had found her spine, and was ready to use it. I want a divorce, she said plainly. But not like this. Not with him walking away clean. Not with people thinking I was just the poor woman who got cheated on. I want the truth to hurt him like it hurt me. And I want her to feel the sting too. I watched her closely. There was no bitterness in her voice, only resolve. Do you have a plan? I asked. She nodded slowly. I do. But I need your help. That surprised me. Anything. She reached into her purse and slid out a manila folder. Inside were pages, bank statements, appointment logs, screenshots of David's private messages with Celeste. She had been collecting more than I realized. "You're not the only one who knows how to find proof," she said with a faint smile. I scanned through the documents. It was all there: dates, times, locations, even a voice memo from Celeste talking about meeting up when Nora goes to her sister's. It was damning. "I've spoken to a lawyer," Nora said. "He's discreet. If I file with all of this, I'll get the house. The joint accounts. I can even press for spousal betrayal under marital misconduct. But that's not all I want." I raised a brow. "What else?" "I want people to know who they are. Not just friends and family, everyone. Their clients. Their church friends. Our neighbors." My lips parted. "Nora, that would destroy them," she finished. "Yes. That's exactly what it will do." There was a pause. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even trying to be vindictive. She was tired. Done. And unwilling to walk away from 10 years of loyalty without a scar to leave behind. "People always think women like me just cry, clean up the mess, and move on," she said quietly. "But I'm done being the one who picks up the pieces. This time, I'm handing back the broken glass." I felt pride rise in my chest like a tide. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she had every right to it. "What do you need from me?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I need you to invite them both. Here. One last time. I need them to feel safe. Comfortable. Like nothing's wrong. And then?" She smiled that dangerous, poised smile again. "Then I show them everything." I looked at her, the woman my son had underestimated, the woman Celeste thought was too soft to fight back, and realized, Nora wasn't just reclaiming her life. She was rewriting the story. And I would be there beside her, every step. Because they weren't ready for what was coming. But we were. I'd hosted countless dinners in my life, birthdays, anniversaries, church gatherings. But this one was different. This one had teeth. This dinner was the kind you remember for the rest of your life, not because of the food, but because of the explosion no one saw coming. Nora planned every detail. She didn't want it to feel like a trap. She wanted it to feel familiar, almost warm. I told David I was having a small family meal, just to reconnect. He sounded distracted on the phone. "Sure, Ma. I'll check with Nora." Nora, of course, already knew. Celeste was harder to invite. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I handed her those photos. But Nora said, "She'll come. She won't resist an opportunity to see you pretend everything's fine. That's what women like her feed on, your silence." She was right. When I texted Celeste and said, "I want to make peace. Come to dinner," she responded within seconds. "Of course, Mags. I'd love that." The night arrived like thunder wrapped in lace. I set the table with the same linen cloth we'd used at David and Nora's rehearsal dinner. I plated everything just right, even folded the napkins into soft triangles. The roast chicken filled the air with familiar comfort, one last lie before the storm. David arrived first, arms full of wine bottles and a grin so casual I nearly slapped it off. "Brought your favorite, Ma," he said, kissing my cheek like a son who still believed I didn't know. Nora greeted him with a smile that could fool any man. She kissed his cheek and complimented his cologne. "You wore the one I like." Celeste came 20 minutes later, looking polished and dangerous in a navy blue dress, heels clicking like weapons across my hardwood floor. "You always make this house smell like love," she said as she hugged me. I held my breath, let her touch me, and pulled away just fast enough to make her wonder. We sat down. We laughed. We poured wine. David made a toast to forgiveness and family. Nora raised her glass with steady fingers. Celeste smiled across the table like she hadn't poisoned this house with her perfume. But Nora had planned the seating. Celeste to David's right. Me across from both of them. And Nora at the head, like a judge preparing to sentence her criminals. The meal passed with surface pleasantries. Chicken. Salad. Herbed potatoes. No one touched dessert. Then Nora stood. She cleared her throat gently and held up her wineglass, not to toast, but to silence the room. "There's something I want to say," she began. "To both of you." David looked up, mid-sip. "Sure, babe. What's up?" "I want to thank you," she said calmly. "Both of you. For showing me the truth." Celeste's fork paused midair. David frowned. "Truth?" Nora smiled sweetly. "The truth about who you really are. About who I've been married to for 10 years. And who I've welcomed into my home like family." Celeste's face twitched. David shifted. "Honey, what are you talking about?" Nora reached into her bag. She pulled out the folder. Not the manila one. A black one, sleek and thick. She laid it on the table like a bomb. "Go ahead," she said, voice still as silk. "Open it." Neither of them moved. So I did. I flipped it open. Photographs. Bank logs. Message printouts. Even a hand-signed note Celeste had written to David, tucked in one of his old jackets. David's face paled. Celeste's eyes darted like a cornered animal. Nora leaned in, eyes locked on David. "You remember that client dinner you said ran late? The one in March?" She pointed to a motel receipt. "Funny. That was the same night you checked in at the Silver Pine Inn. Alone? Or with her?" "Nora," David began. But she raised a hand. "Don't lie to me. Not here. Not in this house. You think I didn't know?" I waited. I collected everything. Every time you smiled at me after crawling out of her bed. I saved that smile. I studied it. I let it break me until it stopped hurting." Celeste's voice cracked. "Nora, please." Nora turned to her. "You. My friend. My maid of honor. You stood by me at my wedding and promised to protect my heart. You were already sleeping with him, weren't you?" Silence. Then Celeste whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Nora stood tall. "And yet here we are." She looked at David again. "You're not just a cheater. You're a coward. You lied to your wife, your mother, your friends. And now?" She pulled out one final paper, a signed court filing. "You've been served. Effective immediately, I'm filing for divorce. With all of this. And with enough proof to make sure neither of you ever look clean again." David stood up, face red. "You set us up?" "No," Nora said coolly. "You set yourself up. I just gave you the spotlight." Celeste tried to speak, but I stood too. My voice was calm, but firm. "You can leave. Both of you. Right now." David looked at me like I had slapped him. "Mom?" I held his gaze. "You heard me." And for the first time in his life, he did. He left with Celeste trailing behind, silence chasing their footsteps. Nora and I stood alone in the quiet afterward. She let out one long, shaking breath. And then, she smiled. Not bitter. Not broken. Just, free. After the front door closed, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. Nora poured herself a fresh glass of wine and sat down like a queen after a battle. Not a hair out of place, not a tremble in her fingers. Just quiet control. But I knew that strength came from pain. "You okay?" I asked gently, lowering myself into the chair beside her. She didn't answer right away. She took a slow sip, then looked me straight in the eye. I thought it would feel messy, eh? But it didn't. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for a year. I nodded, my chest swelling with something deeper than pride. Respect. "Ah. Do you think they believed I'd stay quiet forever?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. Because you were kind. Because you loved him. And women like you, people think you're too soft to fight. But soft doesn't mean weak. She smiled, faintly. No. It doesn't. That night, Nora stayed at my place. I gave her the guest room, but neither of us slept much. She sat by the window most of the night, watching the dark sky. I heard her sob once, but not from regret. From relief. Meanwhile, I knew what would happen next. David wouldn't go quietly. And Celeste? She was too self-obsessed to accept consequences. I didn't have to wait long. By morning, the town had whispers. A friend from church texted me, "Did you really kick David out of the house in front of Celeste?" Another said, "I heard Nora's divorcing him." Is it true she found out about Celeste? The fire had already started. By noon, David called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. "Mom. Please. Call me back. I didn't know what I was doing. Don't shut me out like this." I didn't call him back. He called again. Then he texted. "Celeste is panicking. She says you and Nora planned this whole thing. I'm begging you, please don't ruin everything." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I replied with a single line, "You ruined it yourself. Own it." Celeste tried, too. She emailed me, rambling about decades of friendship, claiming David seduced her. I didn't reply. Because here's the thing no one tells you, when you finally choose truth over family, it doesn't shatter you. It sets you free. But for them? It was just beginning. By the weekend, Nora's lawyer had filed the petition, and served David through his office. She froze their joint accounts. Reclaimed her name. She even contacted the HR department at Celeste's marketing firm with documentation of the affair. They had just hired her to consult on a family values campaign. Oh, the irony. It was brutal. But it was clean. And Nora? She didn't gloat. She didn't scream. She just stood in the truth and let it speak louder than vengeance ever could. She moved into a small cottage 3 blocks from mine, her own space, her own life. Every Sunday, we had tea together. We talked about everything: flowers, recipes, books. Never David. Not anymore. I watched her rebuild herself, not into the woman she used to be, but into someone stronger. Fiercer. Unshakable. One morning, as we sat on the porch, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think he'll ever be sorry?" I thought for a long time. Then I said, "Maybe. But it won't matter. Because by the time he realizes what he lost, you'll be too far ahead to care." Nora didn't say anything. She just nodded. And smiled. Because sometimes, the best revenge is peace. The fallout came faster than we expected. Nora had made one public post on Facebook. Just one. No rage, no finger pointing. Just a calm caption and a photo, her walking away from the house she once shared with David, suitcase in hand, wedding ring placed on the wooden railing. 10 years. 1,000 chances. And finally, a door closed for good. Here's to truth. And to never accepting less than you deserve. The comments exploded. Friends. Colleagues. Neighbors. Women she barely knew, sharing stories, sending support. David had underestimated Nora's silence. He thought it was submission. He didn't realize it was strategy. By Monday, David's boss called him in for a conversation about professionalism. His firm had a zero-tolerance policy for ethical conflicts, and since Celeste had worked on a campaign for one of their biggest clients, and David had kept their affair quiet, it didn't look good. Celeste, meanwhile, was trying to play damage control. She posted cryptic quotes about forgiveness and being misunderstood, but people saw through it. Even her younger daughter, whom I used to babysit, unfollowed her on social media. At church, whispers swirled. I walked in that Sunday alone, chin high, back straight. Some women avoided my gaze. Others squeezed my hand and gave a knowing nod. But the one that broke me? Mrs. Elridge, an old widow who rarely spoke, pulled me aside after service. She leaned in and whispered, "What your son did, what she did, you chose right, Maggie. Most mothers wouldn't have." I held her hand and whispered back, "Most women don't get the chance to make it right." I did. And I meant it. The guilt didn't go away entirely. Of course not. He was still my son. I had once rocked him to sleep when he had nightmares. Kissed his scraped knees. Taught him how to tie his shoes. But the man who cheated, lied, and laughed behind Nora's back, that man wasn't the boy I raised. That man had become a stranger. One afternoon, David came to my porch. No warning. No call. Just stood there with a look in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, shame. I opened the door, but I didn't let him inside. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Talk," I said, arms crossed. "I messed up," he said simply. "I know that now. I lost everything. Nora. My job. You. Celeste's gone back to her sister's. She's not returning my calls." I nodded slowly. "And what do you want from me?" He looked down. "I don't know. Forgiveness? A place to sit for 5 minutes?" I exhaled. "You had 10 years to sit beside your wife. You chose someone else's bed instead. And you want 5 minutes now?" His eyes welled. "You don't understand. She made me feel wanted. Like I mattered." That stung. Because Nora had made him matter every day. "She made you feel powerful, David," I said. "Nora made you feel accountable. That's the difference." He wiped his eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Then find out," I said quietly. "But you won't do it here." I closed the door softly. Not to hurt him. But because boundaries, like truth, were overdue in this family. Later that night, Nora came over. I told her he had shown up. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "I told him the truth," I said. "And I sent him on his way." She nodded. "Thank you." Then she handed me a piece of paper. It was a business license. Her name. Her own brand. A small interior design company she had dreamed about for years but always put off for David's career. "I filed it today," she said. "No more waiting. No more dimming myself for someone else's comfort." I held the paper in my hands and smiled. Your own name. Your own path. And Nora? She was already walking it, faster than David could ever catch up. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like fireworks. That business license in Nora's name carried more weight than any diamond David had ever slipped on her finger. It wasn't just legal. It was symbolic. Her own name. Her own brand. Her own life. "I've always wanted to design spaces that feel like truth," she said that evening, sitting across from me on the porch, a sketchbook open in her lap. "Not just pretty curtains and throw pillows, but real peace. A room that lets you breathe." I watched her fingers move across the page. Confident. Fluid. There was color in her cheeks again. Light in her voice. It wasn't the old Nora returning, it was a woman I had never met. We went to the local business office together. She filed everything in person. "I want to walk it into the world myself," she said. "No mailing it in." They handed her a printed sign for her temporary studio space, Nora Ames Interiors. It was the first time I saw her surname without David's. It looked perfect. Like it belonged to her all along. Meanwhile, David was unraveling. Mutual friends told me he had been let go from the firm. Not officially fired, but encouraged to resign quietly. The affair, paired with financial missteps on a client account, had made him a liability. He was staying in a rented apartment above a mechanic's shop in the next town over. No job. No Celeste. No wife. No home. He texted me once, "I'm sorry. I don't know how I became this man." I didn't respond. Because sorry didn't stitch torn hearts. It didn't erase lipstick-stained lies or photos from motel parking lots. It didn't rebuild what Nora had to drag herself out of alone. Celeste, on the other hand, tried to spin her story. She told people it was a moment of weakness, that she didn't mean for it to go so far. But people don't forget when betrayal wears a familiar face. The invitations stopped coming. Her calendar emptied. Even her book club quietly dissolved. One Sunday, I saw her at the farmer's market. She looked thinner. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She tried to approach me. I turned and walked away. Because forgiveness is one thing. But re-entry into my life? That door was locked. Back at Nora's new studio, a small, sunlit space in a converted barn, she had painted the front door sky blue. "This is where I begin again," she said. Inside, swatches of fabric lined the wall. Mood boards. A tiny kettle in the corner. A chair for me. "First client appointments next week," she said. A woman going through a divorce. Wants her bedroom to feel like freedom again. I nodded. "Sounds like someone you understand." She smiled. Deeply. We stayed there for hours, sipping tea, watching the late autumn light soften over the hills. "You know," I said, "you didn't just survive this, Nora. You transcended it." She looked up, eyes steady. "I didn't do it alone." And she was right. We were two women, wronged in different ways by the same man. One by blood. One by love. But together, we had chosen truth. Dignity. And distance. David didn't break her. Celeste didn't win. Nora had her name on the door. And me? I had my daughter-in-law's hand in mine. And neither of us would ever look back. By November, the trees outside my home had shed most of their leaves. The wind was colder, crisper, like everything had shifted. Even the air felt honest. Stripped bare. Like us. Nora's studio was gaining attention fast. A local magazine featured her in a spotlight article, "Designing Healing: How One Woman Turned Her Broken Marriage into a Beautiful Business." She didn't name David or Celeste. She didn't have to. The entire town already knew. And the fact that she refused to weaponize her pain for clicks? That earned her even more admiration. She wasn't just rebuilding. She was rising with quiet grace. And David? He was slipping further into the background. He didn't come to Thanksgiving. I didn't invite him. It was the first time in 34 years that there wasn't a place set for my son at my holiday table. I thought it might break me. But when I looked around and saw Nora laughing with my nieces, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour smudged across her cheek from helping with the pie dough, I felt something stronger than sadness. I felt peace. "I know this might be hard for you," Nora said softly when we were alone in the kitchen. "It is," I admitted. "But it's also necessary." She nodded. "We're writing new traditions now." "That's what you told me the night I left him." "And I meant it," I replied. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, I sat alone at the table and stared at the empty chair where David used to sit. I didn't cry. I just whispered into the silence, "I hope you find yourself someday. But not here. Not at this table. Not until you understand what you broke." The following week, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was from David. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your time. I know what I did to Nora was cruel. I was selfish. I see that now. But what hurts more than losing her is realizing I've lost you. I watched your face when I walked into your house that night. You weren't angry. You were disappointed. And that gutted me. I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I just want you to know I'm trying. I've started seeing someone. A therapist. I've been journaling. Trying to figure out why I became the man who could do what I did. I don't expect you to believe me. But I'm trying to become someone you'd be proud of again. Love, always, David. I read it twice. Then folded it gently. I didn't throw it away. But I didn't respond either. Because letters are easy. Change is not. I didn't tell Nora about the letter right away. I wanted to protect her peace. But weeks later, when we were decorating the tree in her studio together, stringing tiny lights between displays of fabric samples, she asked me, "Do you think people can really change?" I paused. If they want to. And if they're willing to lose everything to do it. She nodded. He did lose everything. And you found yourself, I said. We stepped back to admire the tree. It wasn't perfect. The lights were slightly uneven. One of the ornaments had a crack. But it was beautiful. Honest. Real. Like her. Nora was no longer David's wife. She was Nora Ames. Interior designer. Survivor. Woman who turned a storm into her sanctuary. And as for me, I was no longer just his mother. I was hers, too. By choice. December brought a different kind of chill, the kind that doesn't just touch your skin but settles in your bones. The holidays had always been a time when our small town buzzed with warmth. Wreaths on every door, twinkle lights strung along the sidewalks, neighbors exchanging cookies and gossip in equal measure. But this year, whispers followed Celeste wherever she went. She tried to fight it. I'll give her that. She still wore her expensive scarves and painted on that flawless smile, as if the scandal hadn't turned her name sour. But I'd see the cracks, her hands trembling as she paid for coffee, her eyes darting when someone whispered in line behind her. Then, one evening, she showed up at my door. I almost didn't open it, but I knew if I didn't face her, she'd just keep circling like a storm cloud. She stood there, shivering slightly, a designer coat wrapped tightly around her frame. "Maggie," she said softly, almost pleading. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to shut the door. But I stepped aside. She walked in and glanced around my kitchen, the one where she'd once sat drinking wine with me, laughing about life, pretending to be my friend. Now she looked like she was standing in a courtroom awaiting a verdict. "I know you hate me," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't hate you," I said calmly. "I just know who you are now." "That's worse." She winced, her perfectly glossed lips trembling. "Megs, please." She paused, looking at me with eyes that used to hold familiarity, but now just looked like lies. "I loved him. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I loved him." "You don't love someone when you crawl through their marriage to get to them," I said sharply. "You wanted what wasn't yours. And now? You've lost everything." "That wasn't love. That was selfishness dressed up in a pretty dress." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I mean it. I never wanted to hurt you." I stepped closer, looking her dead in the eyes. "You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Nora. A woman who trusted you like a sister. Do you know what it takes for someone like her to smile again after what you both did?" She opened her mouth but no words came. "I don't want your apology, Celeste," I continued. "I don't need it. What I need is distance. You won't call me. You won't come to my house. And if I see you trying to reach Nora, so help me, I will make sure everyone knows just how far your betrayal went." Her breath hitched. She nodded, tears threatening her perfect mascara. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Megs." And then she left. I locked the door behind her. When I turned around, I found Nora standing in the hallway, silent, watching. "You heard?" I asked. She nodded. "All of it." We sat at the kitchen table, both quiet for a long moment. Finally, Nora spoke, her voice low but steady. "She's going to keep trying to be the victim, isn't she?" She can try, I said. But she won't win. Not anymore. Nora smiled faintly, and there was something in that smile, something unshakable. Good. Because I'm done being silent. And she meant it. From that day forward, Nora didn't just rebuild her life, she started thriving. She took on 2 big projects for high-end clients in town, and her studio was suddenly on everyone's lips, not because of the scandal, but because of her talent. As for Celeste, she faded. Like a stain that no one could scrub out, so everyone just learned to look past her. But for me? I wasn't looking past anything anymore. I was looking forward. It had been months since the night we exposed everything. Months since David walked out with his pride shattered and Celeste vanished into silence. But on a cold January morning, I saw her again. I had gone into town early, before the frost melted off the rooftops. I was at the corner cafe, the one where everyone goes not just for coffee, but for the latest updates on everybody else's life. I was sipping a bitter black roast when I felt it. That shift in air. That subtle tightening in your chest when someone you once trusted walks into the same room. Celeste. She didn't order. She didn't smile. She didn't even make eye contact. She just stood at the window near the exit, staring out as if she was waiting for something, or someone, to make this day different than the last 100. She looked smaller. Not physically, she still had the tall frame, the sleek blonde hair she kept so precisely maintained. But her energy was different. Dull. Like the spotlight she'd always basked in had been turned off for good. A few heads turned her way. One woman whispered something behind her hand. Celeste shifted her weight, uncomfortable in her own skin. I didn't speak to her. I didn't need to. I had already said everything that needed to be said. And still, watching her stand alone in a room where she used to command attention, it didn't bring me joy. It brought something quieter. Closure. That night, Nora came by for dinner. She walked into my kitchen humming, cheeks rosy from the cold. She tossed her gloves onto the counter and hugged me like always. No pain. No hesitation. Just ease. Over soup and warm bread, I told her what I'd seen. Celeste was in the cafe this morning. Nora didn't blink. She just broke off a piece of bread. Was she alone? Yes. Good. We ate in silence for a moment before she looked up at me and said, I don't want to be the woman who still looks over her shoulder. I don't want to care where they are, or what they're doing. I want to outgrow them. You already have, I said. Look at what you've built. Her eyes sparkled. Do you know what I did today? I smiled. What? I signed a lease for a second studio. One in Burlington. I've got 3 new clients in that area. One of them's a therapist who read the article about me and said she wanted her waiting room to feel like a safe landing. I reached across the table and held her hand. You became a safe landing for yourself. Now you're doing that for others. She squeezed my fingers, and for the first time, I saw not just resilience in her, but legacy. A woman who had taken the ugliest part of her life and made it beautiful. David had reached out again last week. He'd left a message on my machine. Mom, I know you probably won't call back. I'm not asking for much. Just a cup of coffee. A chance to say something that isn't an apology, but maybe a beginning. I hadn't responded. But that night, after Nora left, I listened to the message again. Not because I missed him, but because I wanted to hear if there was anything in his voice that reminded me of the boy I raised. And there was something. A pause. A breath between words. A sound like someone learning to regret. I didn't know yet if I'd answer him. But I knew one thing with certainty, I wouldn't let that decision cloud what Nora and I had built together. She wasn't just my ex-daughter-in-law. She was family. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just watching someone heal. I was healing too. 2 weeks passed before I responded. Not with a phone call. Not even with a message. but with a letter. I found a plain note card, no flowers, no colors, just clean cream paper and ink. And I wrote the kind of words a mother never imagines having to put to her own son. David, you asked for something that isn't an apology. Something that might be a beginning. But beginnings require honesty. And so far, I've only seen you running from truth. You broke a vow. Not just to Nora, but to yourself. You threw away something good for something shallow. And you didn't just cheat on your wife, you cheated on every version of the man you once swore you'd be. But I hear something in your voice now. A pause. A quiet. A softness. That's the only reason I'm writing this at all. Underscore if you want to begin again, don't come to me first. Don't come with flowers or sorry eyes. Start by becoming someone your future self can live with. Then maybe, someday, we'll sit together again. Until then, your mother underscore Maggie. I mailed it. No return address. If he wanted to find me, he'd know where the porch swing waited. But it would have to be on my terms now. Not his. A few days later, I told Nora. She was at the studio, painting a sample board when I arrived. Her hands were speckled with chalky white and pale green, her hair tied up in a messy twist. She looked younger somehow, lighter. As if something inside her had finally stopped bleeding. I watched her for a moment before speaking. I wrote to him. She didn't stop painting. Did you tell him everything? Only what mattered. She nodded once. You know, I've forgiven him. That surprised me. You have? I had to, she said. Not for him. For me. I didn't want to carry his shame anymore. Or his shadow. She stepped back and looked at her work, cool tones, soft light, a space that felt like morning. But I'll never go back, she added. And I'll never forget. Some wounds stay. You just stop letting them define you. I stepped forward, looked at the design. It's beautiful. It's peace, she said. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth and pulled out the photo album I hadn't touched in years. There were pictures of David as a boy, his toothy grin, his skinned knees, the Halloween when he dressed as a pirate and held my hand like I was the whole world. And then there were the ones with Nora. Their wedding. Their trip to Lake Champlain. That Christmas where she wore the red scarf I gave her, and David looked at her like she was light itself. I kept those pictures. Not to remember what was lost. But to honor what was real. Because the love Nora gave him? That was real. The trust she gave me? Still real. Even if David had burned his bridges, I would never burn that part of my past. I had chosen her. And now, she was thriving without him. As for Celeste, she never returned to town. Her house went up for rent. Her name faded from the committees and the club rosters. No one talked about her anymore. She became a ghost in the margins. And David? He was trying. I heard from the bank teller that he got a small job doing IT support in Burlington. Quiet. Unremarkable. Maybe that's what he needed. To be a man without attention. To finally learn humility. As winter melted into early spring, Nora and I took a walk through the orchard trail behind my house. The first buds had started showing. She looked up at the bare trees and smiled. Funny how something can look dead for months, and then bloom again like it never broke. I reached for her hand. Just like us. She squeezed my fingers, her smile steady. We weren't broken anymore. We were blooming. The first daffodils peeked up through the frost 3 days after that walk. It was early for blooms. Vermont springs are usually slow to soften, but something about those yellow petals breaking through the hard ground felt poetic. Like the earth had been watching us, waiting for the right moment to open. Nora's second studio launched that same week. Smaller than the first, but nestled on a quiet corner in Burlington with big windows that spilled golden light onto her carefully arranged design boards. She called it the Second Light. I asked her why that name. Because everyone deserves more than one sunrise, she said simply. People came in for consultations, but they stayed to talk. Women, mostly. Some going through divorces. Some mourning children. Some simply lonely. Nora gave them more than interior designs, she gave them spaces to reclaim their dignity. Her waiting area was lined with soft cream walls, sage curtains, and one framed quote, "You are allowed to start again." It wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary. And me? I found myself visiting every Wednesday. I'd bring baked goods or flowers, excuses to check in. But secretly, I just liked sitting near her. Watching her light fill a room that used to feel so far away. One Wednesday afternoon, while Nora met with a client in the back, a young woman walked in. Nervous. Clutching a purse like a shield. She looked barely 30. "Is Nora here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's finishing a session," I said gently. "Do you want to sit?" She nodded and lowered herself into one of the chairs. She looked around, taking in the space. "It's peaceful here." "That's what she creates," I replied. "Peace." She hesitated. "I'm here because, well, I saw the article about her." And her voice cracked. "I'm in something I don't know how to get out of." And the way she spoke about surviving made me think, maybe I could too. I swallowed hard. "You can." She looked at me. "You're her mother?" There was a pause. I smiled. "Not by blood. But by everything that counts." And in that moment, I realized something. Nora wasn't just surviving her story anymore. She was giving other women permission to write new endings for theirs. Later that evening, after the client left, I told Nora about the girl. She nodded, a quiet understanding in her eyes. "They find me," she said. "Like I found myself. In pieces, and then in rooms I built." We sat on the studio floor and shared leftover lemon bars I'd brought. The laughter was easy, soft like a quilt around us. And then she said something that stayed with me. "You know what hurts the most about betrayal?" she asked. "It's not the act itself. It's how much of yourself you gave to someone who didn't honor it." I nodded. "And the most powerful thing we can do? Is give that same love to ourselves," she finished. Spring moved forward. Slowly. Faithfully. David never replied to my letter. But I didn't need him to. That chapter was closed. Celeste remained a name unspoken. A past that didn't deserve a future. Nora and I? We bloomed like those daffodils. Quietly. Without anyone's permission. And the world, finally, felt like it had caught up. It came in a cream envelope with no return address. Just my name, Margaret Hollis, written in pen so neat, I knew instantly who had sent it. David. I hadn't heard from him in months. Not since the letter I mailed. I'd begun to think he was gone for good, swallowed by shame or silence. But when I opened the envelope, my hands trembling just slightly, I found not an apology, but a wedding invitation. "David Hollis and Clara Monroe request the honor of your presence, Clara Monroe." I didn't know the name. Not from town. Not from any of the stories I'd overheard at the cafe or whispers passed quietly in the aisles of the church. She was a stranger. But I could see her in my mind, someone fresh. Unmarked by his past. Someone who didn't know the name Nora, or the damage that name still etched into him like frost on glass. The wedding was small, by the sound of it. A park in Montpelier. Just close family and friends. And yet, somehow, I was invited. I stared at that invitation for hours. It sat untouched on my kitchen table, beside the lemon-scented candle Nora had given me, and a half-finished crossword puzzle I couldn't make myself focus on. What was he thinking? That I'd come? That I'd sit in a pew, smile, and clap while he tried to pretend the past didn't exist? That night, I brought the envelope to Nora's studio. She was rearranging swatches on a new project, a nursery for a woman who had just adopted twin girls. The space was filled with soft yellows and minty greens, a rocking chair in the corner, and a mobile shaped like clouds. It smelled like fresh linen and hope. When she saw the invitation in my hand, her eyes flicked over at once, and then she returned to her work. "He's getting married," I said. "To someone new?" I nodded. "Clara Monroe." She exhaled softly, not a sigh, just a release of air. I wondered when he'd try to rewrite the story. I waited. For bitterness. For pain. But it didn't come. Instead, Nora set down her clipboard and came to sit beside me. "Are you going to go?" I shook my head. "No." "Because of me?" she asked gently. I turned to her. "Because of me. Because I've seen the damage weddings can cover up with frosting and flowers. Because he's still running, Nora. And I won't applaud it." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you." We didn't talk about it again. A week later, the date of the wedding came and went. I sat on my porch swing that afternoon, wrapped in a shawl, watching the spring wind tease the tulips in my garden. And I didn't think about David standing under some gazebo with a new woman. I thought about Nora designing a new life. Because some ceremonies don't need churches or white dresses. Some redemptions happen in silence. In small acts of choosing ourselves again. And again. And again. Nora didn't need a new husband. She had herself. And she had me. It was the morning after David's wedding when I found the package. No note. No sender. Just a brown paper box tied neatly with string, sitting on the bench beside my porch swing like a silent confession. At first, I thought it might be from a neighbor, someone dropping off muffins or a potted plant, the way we do in this town. But something about it felt too intentional. Too quiet. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. The string was tight, like it didn't want to let go of what was inside. My fingers hesitated. And then I opened it. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue, was a photograph. An old one. A snapshot of David and Nora on their honeymoon, him in a faded baseball cap, her in oversized sunglasses, both laughing in the back of a boat. The edges were curled. On the back, in my son's handwriting, "You were right. She was gold." I let it slip through my hands. Underneath it, a book. "The Road Back to You." A self-reflection book. Pages bookmarked. Some scribbled in. A journey someone had clearly started, and maybe even meant to finish. At the bottom of the box was a small envelope. Just one word on the front, "Mom." I opened it slowly. "I didn't invite you to witness my new beginning out of ignorance. I invited you because I hoped, deep down, that if you saw me try again, maybe you'd believe I was trying at all. Clara is kind. But she doesn't know me like you do. Or like Nora once did. I don't expect your blessing. But I wanted you to know, what I did broke more than a marriage. It broke the boy you raised. And I've spent the past year picking him up piece by piece. I'll never ask for Nora's forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am asking for something quieter. Maybe, one day, a chance to be your son again. Love you, always. David." I read the letter twice. Then again. And I cried. Not because it changed everything. But because it meant something had finally begun to move inside him. The version of David I had raised, the one with a heart, a conscience, a soul, he wasn't gone. He was just buried. And maybe, just maybe, he was clawing his way back. I didn't tell Nora right away. Some things don't need to be passed on. Some griefs are private. But I did walk to her studio that afternoon. I brought her tulips. "From your garden?" she asked, taking them with a smile. I nodded. "They came back stronger this year." She looked at them gently, then back at me. "Like us." We sat in the corner together, sharing tea and silence, watching a mother pick out paint swatches for her daughter's dorm room. That's the thing about healing. It isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or headlines. It happens in quiet moments, tea with someone who once broke beside you. Laughter in a room you thought you'd never fill again. Tulips growing where snow once buried everything. David may never return fully to the man he was. And I may never sit across a dinner table from him with the same softness in my eyes. But I believe in people who fall. And I believe in the ones who stand back up, bloody, changed, and trying. It was raining when Nora called. Not a thunderstorm, just that gentle Vermont drizzle that taps the windows like a memory. I was halfway through knitting a scarf, the kettle just beginning to hum, when the phone rang. "Maggie," she said, "can you come by the studio? I want to show you something." I could hear it in her voice, something soft but excited. Like the moment just before a surprise is revealed. I put on my coat and walked the 4 blocks to the second light, umbrella in one hand, heart quietly curious. When I arrived, she was waiting by the door, holding a key in her palm. "It's finished," she said. "The back room. I never told you what I was working on in there." I followed her through the main studio, past soft couches, cream walls, calming lamps, and toward a small room at the back, its door freshly painted a muted rose. She unlocked it slowly and stepped aside so I could enter first. I wasn't ready for what I saw. It was my life. In soft color. In memory. In grace. There was a reading chair just like the one I'd had when David was small, a crocheted throw across it in the exact shade of blue I used to wear every Sunday. On the windowsill, small potted herbs lined up neatly, just like I had once kept in the tiny kitchen of our old farmhouse. A wooden shelf displayed framed photographs, not just of Nora and me, but of quiet moments she had captured over the past year. Me handing her a pie through her front door. Us laughing over spilled tea. A tulip from my garden. A close-up of my wrinkled hands gently stitching fabric. On the far wall hung a painting. A porch swing in soft watercolor, wrapped in vines. The same swing I sat on when this story began. "This is your room," she said quietly. "Not just here, but in my life. I wanted you to know that no matter where I go, what I build, you'll always have space. This is where I go when I forget how strong I am. Because you remind me." I couldn't speak. I walked in slowly, ran my hand over the soft chair, the worn wood floor, the frame around our picture. The air smelled like lavender and something older, comfort, maybe. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to," Nora said. "You already gave me everything." And in that moment, something shifted in me. Not a tearful breakdown. Not a rush of pain. Just peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you realize that even after the worst betrayals, even after the deepest cuts, you are still capable of being loved. Deeply. Freely. By someone who saw every broken part and still chose to build something with you. I sat in the chair. It fit like memory. Nora knelt beside me and placed a small box in my lap. "One more thing," she said. Inside was a key. To the room. And underneath it, a handwritten note, to the woman who taught me how to rebuild, not with bricks or bitterness, but with love. I looked down at her and cupped her cheek. "I didn't give you strength, Nora. I just reminded you it was already there." She smiled. "And now I remind myself every day. I never imagined my son's betrayal would lead me here. To a room in the back of a studio. To a space built not from obligation, but from choice. David lost something when he lost her. I gained something when I chose her. And in this room, every wall whispered the same thing: some family we are born into. Some we choose. And sometimes, they choose us right back." It was a Sunday afternoon in April when it happened. A knock on the door, not urgent, not demanding. Just steady. Like someone who had been standing there for a while, working up the courage to try. I opened it slowly. And there he was. David. He looked different, thinner, older, humbled. His shoulders sloped in a way they never used to. His eyes, once proud and too quick to smirk, were softer now. Quieter. He wasn't wearing anything special. Jeans, a coat too big in the shoulders, his hands tucked deep in his pockets like he was afraid they'd betray him again. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stood there for a beat, the wind teasing the hem of my cardigan. I said nothing. Just took him in. This was my son. But not the boy I raised, and not quite the man who broke everything either. He was something in between. "I don't want to come in," he said quickly. "I mean, I won't stay. I needed to see you. Face to face." I stepped aside without a word. Not as an invitation, but as an allowance. A quiet letting in. He sat at the kitchen table. The same one where Nora and I had shared tea 1,000 times since everything fell apart. He didn't touch the mug I placed in front of him. Just stared at the steam as if it might answer for him. "I don't expect anything," he began. "I just want to say this out loud. All of it." I nodded. "Then say it." He swallowed. "I was a fool. And not just because I cheated. Not just because I lied. But because I traded something real for something easy. I thought excitement meant love. I thought Nora would always be there, waiting. And when she wasn't," he shook his head. "It crushed me. But I deserved it. I waited. I ruined something good," he continued. "And I didn't just hurt her. I hurt you. I broke your trust. I made you choose between your son and your conscience." Tears burned the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I used to think I was the victim," he said quietly. "That people turned on me too fast. That you abandoned me. But I've come to see, no one turned. I just stepped out of the circle and called it exile." I finally spoke. "Do you love Clara?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. But I love her with open eyes now. Not blindly. Not selfishly. I'm not who I was. And I know I can never undo what I did to Nora. But I'd like to at least be someone worth knowing again. To you." I stared at him for a long time. Then said, "You are my son. That has never changed. But love doesn't mean pretending nothing happened." He nodded. "I know." I stood, walked to the sink, and poured his untouched tea down the drain. Not out of anger, but finality. Then I turned back. I believe in second chances. Not resets. Not forgetting. But starting again, from truth. His eyes filled with tears. "Can we do that?" Slowly, I said. And with honesty this time. He stood. Looked unsure whether he could hug me. I nodded once, and he stepped forward, wrapping his arms around me, not tightly, not like old times, but with the carefulness of someone who knows they're holding something fragile. I didn't cry until after he left. And when I told Nora later, she didn't ask for details. She just smiled and said, "I'm glad he came. But I'm more glad you stayed exactly where you needed to be." That night, I sat in my porch swing, the same swing where this story began. The wind was soft. The sky lavender with the last light. And for the first time I felt something new, not anger. Not grief. Not revenge. But release. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means choosing peace over poison. And that, I realized, was the final gift betrayal could never touch. The first time I saw Nora speak at a women's conference, I didn't recognize her voice. Not because it had changed, but because I was finally hearing it, clear, confident, and unburdened. She was standing at a podium inside the Vermont Women in Business Summit, the soft hum of applause still echoing as she adjusted the microphone. Her name tag read Nora Ames, founder, The Second Light. No mention of Hollis. No trace of who she used to be tethered to. "I used to think healing came after someone apologized," she began, eyes scanning the quiet audience. But what I learned is, healing starts the moment you stop waiting for that apology. The moment you say, "What happened to me is not my fault, but my future is mine." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. And mine were no exception. She talked about how she started her business in the aftermath of betrayal. How design wasn't just about spaces, but about creating rooms that gave women permission to start over. How sometimes, survival is the most radical thing a woman can do. And as I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching her own every inch of that stage, I realized something simple, and deeply true: she had become the woman I had always hoped my son would be lucky enough to love. And he had been. He just didn't know how to hold on to her. After the speech, she came down the steps to find me. Her cheeks were flushed from applause, her hands shaking with adrenaline. I stood and hugged her, pulling her close, whispering, "You did it." "No," she whispered back. "We did." That evening, back at her studio, she showed me something she'd been quietly working on. A book. Not just sketches or swatches, but her story. A memoir, raw and simple, titled, "Rooms I Had to Build, A Story of Leaving, Losing, and Becoming." She laid it in my hands like a sacred offering. "You're in it," she said. "Not just your name. But who you were to me. Who you are." I flipped to a chapter titled "The Porch Swing." It opened with a line that stopped me cold: "She wasn't my mother by birth. But she held my heart like one. And when the world broke, she was the only one who didn't ask me to pretend it didn't hurt." I held the book to my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of the woman I had become, not because I was strong, or brave, or right, but because I had chosen love over silence. Nora went on to launch an outreach initiative from her studio: free design makeovers for women leaving shelters, starting over, or recovering from abuse. She partnered with counselors and social workers. She gave broken women beauty, without asking them to be whole first. She didn't need a last name to do it. She didn't need a husband's approval. She had herself. And me, always watching from the side, holding her coat, cheering like she was still the girl who'd baked me scones and cried in my kitchen. David came to one of her charity events. Quietly. He stood in the back. He didn't speak to her. Just donated anonymously and left before anyone could recognize him. When I told Nora, she smiled softly. "I hope he's finding peace." Truly. It wasn't a bitter hope. It was real. Because by now, we both knew, revenge is temporary. But growth? That's forever. And the legacy Nora was building had nothing to do with who hurt her. It had everything to do with who she became in spite of it. Before we begin, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I'd love to know what part of the world your heart is healing in. There's a room in my home now, small, sun-washed, with lace curtains that dance in the morning light. Nora designed it. She called it the final room. Not because it's the end of a story, but because it's the place where nothing needs to be rewritten. It is everything I never knew I needed: a chair that fits my spine just right, a reading lamp with soft amber light, and a side table with enough space for a cup of tea, a framed photo, and my quiet. That photo? It's not of my son. It's of Nora. Laughing. Hair wild in the wind. Tulips in her arms. A reminder. A marker of the day I chose her. Because this story, our story, isn't about a cheating husband, or a broken son, or a friendship lost to betrayal. It's about what a woman does when she has every reason to stay silent and chooses, instead, to speak. To rise. To love louder than the pain. Nora's outreach project now has a name: New Light Foundation. She's renovated 10 homes for women escaping abusive situations. Each space is filled with love, softness, and permission to start again. And every home has a small plaque by the front door that says, "You belong here." She insisted I come with her to the 10th opening. "I want you to place the plaque," she said. "You taught me what belonging really means." I cried as I knelt by the threshold, pressing that plaque into its frame. A little girl peeked out from behind the sofa inside, her mother behind her, clutching the keys to a new beginning. I looked at Nora and whispered, "This is everything." She nodded, eyes glassy. "It really is." As we drove home, she reached over and held my hand. "You know what I've realized?" "What?" I asked, still staring at the twilight sky. "Forgiveness doesn't mean the wound never happened. It just means you're no longer letting it bleed into everything else." And she was right. David still writes sometimes. Updates from afar. He's sober now. Stable. He knows he'll never return to the life he lost, but he's quietly carving a new one. I've forgiven him. But Nora? Nora is the one I call when my hands shake. When my roof leaks. When I need someone to sit on the porch swing and talk about nothing until everything feels right again. She's not my daughter-in-law anymore. She's my daughter. Full stop. And if you ask me what love looks like? It looks like that swing. That room. That plaque on the wall. That woman who walked through fire and built a garden where she was once burned. This story began with a lipstick-stained mug. It ends with legacy. A bond not built through blood, but through bravery. So if you're listening right now, maybe you've been hurt. Maybe someone you trusted broke you. Maybe you're still sitting in the ashes, wondering if anything can bloom. Let me tell you this, you can rebuild. You can choose peace. You can choose yourself. And just like Nora did, you can become the light you were waiting for.